The two made their way to Sina's bun shop, choosing their usual spot by the window, ordering 2 bowls of porridge, 6 buns, and a side of pickled vegetables. "Miss, someone across from us is staring." Hannah Doe shielded half her face with her large bowl, winking at her mistress across the table. Lillian Young paused, turning to look behind her. A single glance revealed the person Hannah Doe had mentioned. Not far from them, separated by a family enjoying their meal, sat a figure in a wide-brimmed hat that concealed their face. Judging by their build, it was a man, quite imposing, flanked by 2 retainers with swords at their hips, clearly trained in martial arts. The man radiated a dangerous aura, making her uneasy. "Eat quickly, and then we leave," Lillian Young said flatly, returning to her porridge without a hint of tension or unusual behavior. They finished their breakfast quickly, placed their silver on the table, and left. Barely 3 steps outside, the proprietress hurried after them, holding the small silver coins they'd left, smiling. "A gentleman has already paid for your steamed buns." "Paid? Who paid?" Before Lillian Young could ask, the man from earlier emerged from the eatery with his retinue. He approached her and said in a low voice, "Follow me." Bloody hell, how terrifying! Could this man be? Lillian Young's face paled. She stumbled back 3 steps, pulling Hannah Doe behind her. "Run!" Like startled rabbits, they scrambled onto the roof, leaping 2 or 3 times before vanishing. "Your lordship, shall we pursue them?" Hannah Doe, still dazed, heard voices and turned in surprise. A gust of wind snatched away the man's face covering, revealing a face marked with a crimson footprint. She stared, speechless with shock. Lillian Young dragged Hannah Doe back to the Snow Aroma Pavilion, collapsing at a table. "Water," she gasped. "I need water to calm my nerves." A cup of tea arrived promptly. Lillian Young drained it in 1 gulp, earning a reproach. "The way you gulp tea like water is a criminal waste of good leaves." A graceful woman settled beside her, elegantly fanning herself. The cool breeze offered a welcome respite from the heat. Lillian Young looked at her gratefully, holding out her empty cup. "Another, please. This time I'll savor it. Tell me, what happened? You look like you ran for your life." "Did you encounter an enemy?" the woman asked, taking the empty cup to refill it. Lillian Young's face was etched with distress. "If only it were an enemy," she murmured. "It's someone, complicated." "Oh? And who might that be?" Laughter drifted in from the doorway as a group of beautiful women entered, each finding a seat. Their gazes, however, remained fixed on Lillian. These gossip-mongers wouldn't rest until they'd unearthed a juicy secret. Lillian Young considered how to recount her heroic tale of impersonation. "Miss, I've brought 3rd Mississippi." Hannah Doe entered with Sylvie Young, who carried a bowl of noodles. Hannah pulled up a chair for Sylvie beside Lillian. Slurp. The sound of noisy eating filled the air. Sylvie Young slurped her noodles, admiring her disguised face, occasionally poking and prodding it, treating Lillian Young's face like a plaything. The last of the hot noodles disappeared with a gulp. Sylvie Young stared at the empty bowl for a moment, then resolutely held it out. "More. More noodles, more egg, more meat, more broth. You'll eat yourself to death one of these days. Or at least into a blimp." Lillian Young's face twitched. "Take that face off," she said sternly. "Immediately. Now." "Why?" "It's good. It suits me." Sylvie Young shook her head, tugging at the disguised face. The feel, the thinness, it's just like my real skin. No one will ever know. Is that so? Lillian Young gave a strained laugh, feigning surprise. I saw Jade Frost a few days ago, and he asked me to give you a message. Well, not just a message, he also said if I had any news of you to let him know, and even asked me to tie you up and wait for him to come and marry you. Second sister, you wouldn't agree to that, would you? Sylvie Young nodded firmly, her eyes narrowing in a smile. What good could he possibly offer you? But he could help me expand my business. Jade Frost is quite the catch, the sales certainly wouldn't be bad. Second sister, I'll help you restore your face right away. Sylvie Young anxiously pulled a blue porcelain jar from her bag, offering it with both hands, carefully explaining how to use it. Pour hot water into a basin for a face soak, then apply this, and your facial skin will peel off like a mask. Of course, that face can still be used afterwards. Alright, leave it here, you can go now. Lillian Young took the porcelain jar and waved her hand dismissively. Can I wait until I've finished my noodles before leaving? Sylvie Young asked timidly, her eyes filled with a pitiful expression. Lillian Young sighed and nodded, tapping her on the head in warning. Don't tell anyone about my return to Snow Aroma Pavilion, otherwise. I know. Sylvie Young nodded repeatedly like a pecking chicken, brazenly suggesting, Second sister, I want to stay here for a few months. Thank you, second sister, you're the best. Her silence was taken as tacit agreement, and Sylvie Young went downstairs to wait for her noodles, relieved. Just as she left the room, she was called back. Come back, I have something for you to do, consider it a condition for your stay at Snow Aroma Pavilion. What is it? Sylvie Young had a bad feeling, looking warily at her second sister. When it came to scheming, no one in the Young family could compare to her second sister. Don't be nervous, it's nothing bad, just deliver a letter to our eldest brother for me. Of course, absolutely do not reveal your identity. Lillian Young quickly wrote the letter, placed it in a white envelope, and handed it to Sylvie Young, patting her shoulder. This glorious and arduous task is entrusted to you, third young mistress. Don't disappoint the expectations of your second sister and the Snow Aroma Pavilion chef. Off you go. Second sister. Sylvie Young looked as if she was about to cry. Can someone else go? There are many sisters in Snow Aroma Pavilion, they won't miss me. Chapter 27, Failed Negotiation, No. The negotiation ultimately failed. Lillian Young smiled as she saw the dejected Sylvie Young off. This was the consequence of trying to scheme against her, no one could escape. Her revenge was terrifying. After nightfall, Lillian Young went alone to Fragrant Veranda Pavilion, ordered a pot of fine tea, and waited for Jasper Young to arrive as planned. She was in a very good mood tonight because someone was going to be unlucky, and her revenge would undoubtedly succeed. Touching the painting placed at her right hand, she smiled triumphantly, her beautiful phoenix eyes slightly raised, carrying a hint of charm and allure, captivating the waiter who came to serve the tea. Miss, the guest you're waiting for has arrived. Do you need me to serve the dishes? The waiter snapped out of his daze, stammering, his face flushed with embarrassment as he lowered his head, not daring to look up. Lillian Young nodded. Let him in, serve the tea first, then the dishes. I'll do it right away, miss, please wait a moment. The waiter hurriedly left, invited her guest into the private room, poured the tea, and then excused himself. Jasper Young, looking at his sister's restored face, seemed to understand something. You've met the third young mistress? The child who delivered the letter today was the third young mistress. I was confused. Only she knows the bone-setting technique. Indeed, not foolish at all. Sit. Lillian Young nodded approvingly, pointing to the opposite seat. After he settled, she handed him the painting beside her, gesturing, "Open it and see." Jasper Young glanced at her suspiciously, slowly unfolding the painting. A single glance was enough to make him hastily fold it back, looking at her in astonishment. "This is..." "Don't doubt it, it's your sister-in-law." Lillian Young smiled mischievously, teasing, "Well, a perfect likeness, isn't it? My painting skills aren't bad, are they? Looking at this painting, surely you feel the stirrings of spring, the fires of desire?" "Jasper, a young lady shouldn't speak such vulgar words." Jasper Young scolded angrily. "Damn it, I don't care if you live or die." Lillian Young slammed the table, making her choice clear. "Brother, don't blame me for being heartless. You played a part in scheming for me to be a substitute bride today. You know my temper. I never suffer a loss. If you scheme against me, you should know the consequences. Make up your mind. Between you and sister-in-law, choose one." "Choose?" Jasper Young's face paled. "Choose what?" "Explain clearly." "Very simple. Tomorrow at noon, run naked on Tower Street. You must act convincingly, or don't blame me for turning my back and hanging your sister-in-law's nude portrait on the East City Gate for all the world to admire. Weigh your options carefully. I hope you make the best choice, lest you regret it later." Lillian Young didn't beat around the bush, kindly reminding him, "Brother, a woman's reputation is a serious matter. I'm sure you've already made your decision. Oh dear, don't let sister-in-law regret marrying the wrong man." "Miss, excuse me." The waiter appeared at the right moment, breaking the tension. The two remained silent, waiting for the waiter to finish serving the food and withdraw. "You..." Jasper Young's face turned green, glaring at his sister, wishing he could strangle her with his bare hands. Fortunately, he still had some sense left, restraining himself after a long while. Through gritted teeth, he roared, "Jasper, you're out of your mind. Brother, spare me the nonsense. You forced me to do this, don't blame me." Lillian Young calmly ate her food, lifting her head to say, "Now that you're here, finish your meal before you leave." "Eat?" He was already full from shock and anger. Jasper Young regretted everything. "Jasper, you've been rebellious since childhood, never listening to our parents. You left the Youngs to establish your own household, and at 20, you're not even worried about marriage. Look at the women your age, all married with children." "I don't like hearing that." Lillian Young slammed her chopsticks down, angrily retorting, "There are plenty of women much older than me who aren't married. Not to mention, take Venomous Touch for example. She's 4 years older than me, and isn't she still single? Our eldest sister is different. You know that." Jasper Young's face darkened, unwilling to discuss the matter. Lillian Young fell silent, knowing she had overstepped, bringing up a painful subject for the Youngs. Neither spoke for a long while. Finally, she sincerely apologized, "I'm sorry, brother. However, the matter of running naked is non-negotiable. I hope you'll prepare yourself mentally. Tomorrow at noon, I'll be waiting at the Idle Moon Tavern. I'll give you half an hour. If you don't come, you'll bear the consequences." "As you wish." Jasper Young flung his sleeve and strode away. The following day, Lillian Young, accompanied by Hannah Doe disguised as Charlotte Trent, arrived at the Idle Moon Tavern half an hour early. They ordered a flask of azure blossom wine and a few pastries, then settled by a window. Lillian leaned against the frame, half her body extended outwards, gazing down at the street below. Hannah Doe sat beside her, eating. She found it odd that her mistress only drank wine and didn't touch the food, her gaze fixed on the street below as if something interesting was happening. Curious, Hannah leaned closer to the window, poking her head out for a better view. She saw nothing but the usual bustling crowd and hurrying carriages. "What are you looking at, miss?" Lillian Young took a sip of azure blossom wine and, instead of answering, asked, "Hannah Doe, what time is it now?" "Oh? It must be noon already." Hannah Doe craned her neck further, scrutinizing the street below once more, but still found nothing of interest. Finally, she shook her head and returned to the table to continue her meal. "Light it," Lillian Young said, frowning slightly, tossing the incense stick she'd been fiddling with to Hannah Doe. Hannah Doe took the incense, lit it, and placed it in the small censer they had brought. "Are you timing something, miss? Are you expecting someone? I'll show you something good in a moment." Lillian Young smiled mysteriously, withdrawing her gaze from the street below. She understood her elder brother and trusted he wouldn't disappoint. A ripple of movement passed through the crowd below. People parted on either side of the street, creating a narrow path. A lone rider approached on horseback, the figure unmistakably her elder brother. Lillian Young smiled with satisfaction, took another sip of wine, and turned to Hannah Doe. "Come here quickly, something interesting is about to happen." Coming. Hannah Doe stuffed her mouth full of food and widened her eyes, looking down. Pfft. Cough, 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 the rice she hadn't yet swallowed sprayed downwards. Hannah Doe's eyes widened, pointing at the approaching rider in astonishment. It's the young master." "I know." Lillian Young hopped onto the windowsill, a flask of wine in one hand and a cup in the other, sitting barefooted with an air of nonchalant grace. Her eyes followed the approaching figure, a smile playing on her lips. Her elegant posture as she drank was enough to make certain eyes burn with envy. Sebastian Ward, positioned directly opposite in another window, had a clear view of her. Those bare ankles were a blatant provocation. This woman, already married, dared to behave so brazenly? Lillian Young, however, saw only Jasper Young. At this moment, there was no room in her eyes for anyone else, oblivious to the smoldering gaze directed at her. Pfft! A mouthful of wine sprayed out. Her eyes nearly popped out of her head. Was that truly Jasper Young? What had happened to him? Jasper Young, stark naked, rode to a halt beneath the Idle Moon Tavern. He looked up, quickly locating his sister. He frowned at the sight of her bare feet. But that wasn't the main issue. The main issue was the shocking state of his face. His normally handsome face was now swollen and red, as if he had been attacked by a swarm of bees. Covered in welts the size of peas, he was almost unrecognizable. This must be his scheme. "Jasper Young, you are indeed formidable." Lillian Young admitted defeat. "Jasper, put your shoes on." True to form, even in this predicament, her elder brother didn't forget to chastise her about her appearance. Jasper Young, as if in defiance, stood motionless beneath the window like a bronze statue, his gaze fixed on her bare feet. Chapter 28, Have you played enough? All right, I concede. Hannah Doe, my shoes. Lillian Young shook her head in resignation and put on her shoes. Opposite her, Sebastian Ward's face was dark as he glared at Jasper Young. The crowd of onlookers grew, and a child pointed at Jasper Young, shouting, "Look, someone's not wearing any trousers." "Hush, be quiet. He's not right in the head. Don't provoke him, or he might lash out." A nearby parent warned their child, giving Jasper Young a strange look. Jasper Young's face darkened instantly. He roared angrily towards the upper floor, "Jasper, behave yourself. Get back to your room and don't make a spectacle of yourself." With that, he bolted, swift as the wind, knocking over a string of onlookers and eliciting a chorus of curses. That's definitely it." Hannah Doe, who had been silent until now, nodded emphatically. Lillian Young was bewildered. "What's definitely it?" "Miss, the eldest young master has definitely been poisoned by the eldest young mistress. It's called the Supreme Visage Elixir. The eldest young mistress had someone test it 3 months ago." Hannah Doe watched Jasper Young disappear into the distance with a sympathetic gaze. She'd heard this poison had no antidote, wasn't life-threatening, and would dissipate within a month. Such a disfigured face, the eldest young master having to endure it for a month, was a dreadful thought. Venomous touch again. She was partly responsible for this malicious act, and this vendetta needed settling. Lillian Young carefully considered how to punish Catherine Young, the first rule being to avoid close contact to prevent being poisoned herself. "Oh, my lord is alive." Hannah Doe looked at Sebastian Ward, speechless with joy. "What?" Lillian Young exclaimed in alarm. She looked up to see Sebastian Ward standing opposite her, his face grim, his eyes promising retribution. Her plan had backfired. She had intended to use Charlotte Trent to pressure her elder brother into obedience, but she had fallen into Sebastian Ward's hands instead. The bungled scheme mortified her. "Have you had enough amusement? It's time to return to the manor with me." Sebastian Ward looked at her calmly, his imposing presence making it hard for her to breathe. "Hannah Doe, time to prove your worth. Stall him." Lillian Young tumbled back into the room, sealed the window with pressure point techniques, and, taking advantage of the moment the window slammed shut, spun around and fled towards the back exit of the Leisure Moon Pavilion. As she vaulted over the back wall, she was met by rows of Duke's Manor guards. Seeing her emerge, they bowed respectfully. "We greet the Duchess. Please return to the manor." Lillian Young's eyes narrowed. She leaped back into the courtyard and headed for the front entrance, only to be intercepted by Sebastian Ward. A flash of movement, a wall of muscle before her, and before she could react, she was in his familiar embrace, held firmly yet gently, unable to escape. "It's time to go home." Sebastian Ward's voice was gentle, devoid of reproach. His actions, however, told a different story. With a swift move, he sealed 2 of her pressure points, rendering her immobile and speechless. She could only watch helplessly as he carried her away. This man was truly two-faced. The fish was hooked, it was time to reel it in. Sebastian Ward carried her into the palanquin and departed with a formidable escort of Duke's Manor guards. Hannah Doe chased after them. "My lord, wait for Hannah Doe." "Blast it all." Lillian Young glared, but her anger evaporated like mist upon meeting Sebastian Ward's gaze, rendering her outburst utterly ineffectual. Upon returning to the Duke's Manor, Sebastian Ward promptly deposited her in the bridal chamber. The decorations from the previous day remained. Vibrant red double happiness symbols adorned the room, auspicious fruits were still meticulously arranged, and even the dragon and phoenix candles lit during the ceremony had yet to fully burn down. Did he intend to reenact the wedding night? A flicker of alarm crossed Lillian Young's face as she watched him warily. Unfazed, Sebastian Ward proceeded to the table, poured 2 cups of wine, offered one to her, and kept the other for himself. "The nuptial cup," he stated, "I need you for this. Can I not drink it?" Lillian Young inquired, a hint of resentment in her voice. "What do you think?" Sebastian Ward reached across, took her hand holding the cup, and drained its contents in a single draught. Left with little choice, she reluctantly followed suit, emptying her own cup with a touch of defiance. The wine was consumed. Was the consummation next? Lillian Young's tension mounted, her face flushing crimson as she sought an escape. She waited, anticipating the extinguishing of the candles, the arrival of the wolf, but after setting down his cup, Sebastian Ward simply said, "Sleep well," and turned to leave. "Keep watch over the Duchess. She is not to leave," he instructed with a sly expression, his intent to confine her clear, infuriating Lillian Young. Hannah Doe arrived later, dispatched by Sebastian Ward to attend her. He also assigned 2 maids from the Duke's manor, both wearing distinctive belts that, without a doubt, concealed flexible swords. Ostensibly there to serve, they were clearly also meant to monitor and restrict her movements. What a charade! Lillian Young glanced at the newly assigned maids, scoffed disdainfully, and instructed Hannah Doe to prepare her for bed. Upon waking, attendants dressed and adorned her, then escorted her to a nearby room for breakfast. Sebastian Ward was already seated at the table. He nodded for the servants to withdraw as she entered and served her a bowl of porridge. "Come and eat." "I don't want porridge. I want steamed buns, Nhu family buns, and their pickled vegetables," Lillian Young retorted, seizing the opportunity to provoke him. Unperturbed, Sebastian Ward placed the porridge before her and proceeded to eat his own breakfast. He finished without a glance in her direction and departed. Watching his rather dashing retreat, Lillian Young gritted her teeth, rubbing her stomach in frustration. "Humph. So inconsiderate. I'll leave you sooner or later." Unable to genuinely stomach starvation, she faced the spread of buns, thin porridge, and delicate side dishes and ate heartily. After 2 bowls of porridge, she realized the Duke's chef was quite skilled, each dish possessed a unique flavor she had never encountered. Just as she finished, setting down her utensils and wiping her mouth, Sebastian Ward returned, carrying a basket which she placed before her. "Here are the breakfast items you requested." He then arranged the contents on the table, 3 large steamed buns, a plate of pickled vegetables, and a bowl of vegetable porridge. Lillian Young's face twitched at the sight. He was doing this on purpose, trying to stuff her to death. What a preposterous tactic! However, she had requested these items. Refusing them would appear rude and unreasonable, drastically diminishing her image. Bloody hell, he's utterly ruthless. "Thank you." Swallowing her anger, she resentfully ate everything and then lumbered away. As soon as she left, Sebastian Ward couldn't hold back any longer and burst into laughter. His laughter echoed for miles, infuriating her. Her permitted range for digestion was now restricted to the light breeze pavilion where she'd stayed last night, followed by a gaggle of maids and guards, practically imprisoned. Who could enjoy a stroll like that? In the end, she could only return to the light breeze pavilion, fuming, to catch up on sleep. Fortunately, Hannah Doe was there. After chatting for a bit, she yawned and instructed, Hannah Doe, go back to our old place and bring all my things here. Oh, and give the things in the drawer to Tu Hong. Make it snappy, be back before lunch. Hannah Doe nodded, memorized her instructions, and hurried out of the Duke's manor. When she awoke, the sun outside was blazing. Even with the curtains drawn, the light was dazzling. She stretched, yawned, and casually asked, what time is it? The maid attending by the bed immediately stepped forward and replied, Your Highness, it's almost noon. His Lordship has sent word, inviting you to dine with him. Chapter 29, Averting Disaster, Settling Scores. Oh, is Hannah Doe not back yet? Lillian Young allowed the servants to dress her, frowning in displeasure. Miss, I'm back. As soon as she finished speaking, Hannah Doe pushed the door open, took a gulp of water in the outer room, and carried her cup inside. I've brought everything. Everyone, come with me. Lillian Young's eyes lit up. Snatching her sash, she tied it herself and pulled Hannah Doe into a run. Two maids frantically chased after them. The four of them raced to the front courtyard of the Duke's manor, where she directed the others to carry in crates of items. A short while later, Sebastian Ward arrived. Seeing her carrying paintings herself under the scorching sun, sweat covering her face, he couldn't help but step forward to assist. Let me do it. You go and rest. Ah, no need, no need. There's not much left. I can manage. No way. These paintings were her hard-earned trade secrets, how could she entrust them to someone else? Most importantly, many were not suitable for young eyes. Discovery would be disastrous. Lillian Young broke out in a cold sweat, forcing a smile as she declined. Let go. Go and rest. Sebastian Ward ordered coldly, reaching out to grab the painting. No. Lillian Young resolutely refused. Each gripping an end of the painting, they wrestled, neither willing to yield. Third brother, third sister-in-law, you're both here. Unexpectedly, Edward Ward arrived for a visit, startling them both into letting go. The rolled-up painting tumbled to the ground. Lillian Young frantically sat down to gather them, Hannah Doe quickly joining to help. The two were in a flurry of activity. Gasp! Those around them drew a sharp breath. Lillian Young felt a chill down her spine. Looking up, she saw Edward Ward blushing shyly. He was looking at her with a devilish expression, giving her a "you're dead" look. Not good, murderous aura. A chill ran through Lillian Young. Her gaze shifted to the side, meeting Sebastian Ward's furious eyes. He held a painting in his hand, the paper trembling violently, the rustling Xian paper crackling with menace. She glanced at it, her face paling, cold sweat beading on her forehead, her eye twitching uncontrollably. Bloody hell, why that painting of all things? So, my dear sister-in-law has harbored a singular affection for me. Had I known, I would have requested Father's blessing for our union sooner. Alas, shut up. Sebastian Ward flung his hand out, the painting shattering in his grasp. He glared icily at Edward Ward. Get out. Ah, my painting. Lillian Young's face paled at the sight of the ruined artwork. She flew at Sebastian Ward in a rage, her hands clamping around his throat. Replace my painting. Replace it, you bastard, you scoundrel, you villain. Enough. Pushed to his limit, Sebastian Ward's handsome face darkened. He coldly shoved her hands away. Charlotte Trent, remember my words. Do not provoke me again. Sebastian Ward, let me tell you this, I am my own person, with my own will and temper. I am not your possession. Don't expect to have everything your way. Provoke me again, and we either part ways or die together. Lillian Young bristled like a cat, her aura suddenly fierce. She glared at Sebastian Ward, then turned to gather the fragments of her painting, refusing to even glance at him. Hannah Doe looked anxiously at Sebastian Ward, her loyalty firmly with her mistress. She shook her head slightly and helped Lillian Young collect the pieces. Sebastian Ward's face paled with fury at their defiance. He snapped at a nearby servant, "Bring fire! Burn everything the Duchess brought! You dare!" The threat to her paintings ignited Lillian Young's fury. She rounded on the servant, her imperious aura halting him in his tracks. The servant looked from the Duke to the Duchess. Neither showed any sign of yielding. Burn the painting or preserve it? He was caught in the crossfire, his internal lamentations echoing his predicament. Edward Ward, sensing the escalating tension, discreetly slipped away from the Duke's manor. Having been subtly dismissed by his brother, he deemed farewells unnecessary. A tremor ran through Sebastian Ward. He had never lost control like this, his emotions consumed by rage. Twice now, this woman had pushed him to the brink. It was dangerous. He didn't want this, and he certainly didn't want to see her rebellious spirit. Were my words not clear enough? Sebastian Ward's gaze was glacial as he looked at the servant, determined to resolve this quickly and avoid further entanglement with her. Bring fire. I said no. Lillian Young glared fiercely at the servant. Caught between a rock and a hard place, the servant stole a glance at the Duke. His mind made up, he gritted his teeth and bowed his head to the Duchess. Forgive me, Your Grace, but I must obey. With that, the servant swiftly departed, returning shortly with a tinderbox and a brazier. He crouched beside the Duchess. Please step aside, Your Grace. Do not make this difficult for me. Step aside, my arse. Lillian Young, having never encountered such a stubborn servant, swore crudely. Her eyes, sharp as blades, fixed on him. You dare touch my treasures, and I'll make sure you regret it. The servant trembled, genuinely afraid to proceed. Sebastian Ward, without a word, snatched the tinderbox from the servant. He pulled out a painting at random, glanced at the reasonably handsome man depicted, and without hesitation, set it alight. Sebastian Ward, you did this on purpose. The painting was incinerated, and Lillian Young screamed again, lunging at Sebastian Ward like a hungry tiger pouncing on its prey, her limbs wrapping tightly around him, sharp teeth sinking into his arm. Oomph! Sebastian Ward cried out in pain, his eyes flashing with icy fury. She was unruly, and needed to be taught a lesson. You, continue burning the paintings. Don't leave a single one. Sebastian Ward casually tossed the lighter to a servant, his arms firmly gripping Lillian Young who clung to him. Under the astonished gazes of the servants and guards, he departed. Lillian Young, realizing the dire situation, immediately released her bike and struggled to break free from his grasp, desperate to save her unique art collection. Her efforts were futile, causing her to erupt in curses. Let me go, Sebastian Ward, you bloody scoundrel. If my paintings are destroyed, your days are numbered. I'll make your life a living hell. Do you hear me? Let go, whack, whack, whack. 3 resounding smacks echoed. Lillian Young abruptly fell silent, her small face first paling with pain, then flushing crimson with shame. That absolute bastard dared to spank her. This was an insult to her very being. She would have her revenge. You're too loud. As my wife, you should be seen and not heard. Her rare silence brought a slight curl to Sebastian Ward's lips, his heart filled with amusement and triumph. Miss Hannah Doe, deeply worried, ran after them. Witnessing Sebastian Ward strike Lillian Young, her eyes widened in shock. This was not good. Her miss, always so proud, had been spanked for the first time. The master had made a grave mistake. Her current silence only meant she was plotting revenge. Wiping away cold sweat, Hannah Doe hurried after the pair, then quietly approached Lillian Young, whispering a plea to Sebastian Ward, Miss, please don't be too harsh. After all, the master is your husband. Husband, my foot. Hannah Doe, what has he given you to make you take his side? Remember, you're mine, not his. Don't you dare defend him again, or I'll dock your wages. Lillian Young glared at Hannah Doe, her resentment deepening. Hashtag chapter 30, I may have caused a catastrophe, miss, I wasn't defending the master, heaven and earth can bear witness. I only care for you. Now that you're married to him, domestic disputes will only harm your marital harmony. Shut up. Lillian Young's head throbbed from Hannah Doe's incessant chatter. Both of you, be quiet. Sebastian Ward's brow twitched, and he turned to cast a cold glance at Hannah Doe. He hadn't missed a word of their conversation, and their talk of revenge intrigued him. Chilled by his glare, Hannah Doe froze, then trailed behind them, sticking her tongue out innocently at her mistress, who was still glaring at her. Lillian Young, exasperated by Hannah Doe's innocence, raised a fist in warning. Her little actions didn't escape Sebastian Ward's notice. Amused by her endearing display, a hint of mirth softened his stern features, and his lips and brows curved upwards. Afterward, Lillian Young was confined, the wicked Sebastian Ward ordering her locked in her room, a formidable line of highly skilled guards stationed outside her door, preventing any escape. Her freedom, once encompassing the entire estate, was instantly reduced to a single room. When Sebastian Ward summoned Hannah Doe, Lillian Young became instantly uneasy, pacing anxiously in her room, gazing out the door, awaiting Hannah Doe's return, praying she wouldn't let slip anything that might reveal her true identity. Half an hour later, Hannah Doe returned, pale as a ghost, frightening Lillian Young, who quickly pulled her inside, bolted the door, and whispered, Hannah Doe, have we been discovered? Hannah Doe shook her head. Miss, His Grace inquired about your paintings. I know that much, get to the point. Lillian Young rolled her eyes, handing Hannah Doe a cup of water to calm her nerves. Hannah Doe took a small sip, then continued, His Grace asked about your paintings. And what about them? What did you tell him? Lillian Young felt a pang of guilt, eager to hear Hannah Doe's response. It was no laughing matter. If he discovered she was the artist behind half those paintings, her neck would surely be on the chopping block. Miss, I fear I've caused a great disaster. Hannah Doe was terrified, tears welling in her eyes. As if you haven't caused enough disasters already. Which one isn't a disaster? Don't worry, this won't be the last. Lillian Young, accustomed to such calamities, offered a comforting pat on Hannah Doe's shoulder. Hannah Doe's distress deepened. She sobbed, This time is different, Mississippi. You'll surely scold me. I told His Grace all your paintings were from the Gentleman's Gazette, not your own work. His face darkened terribly, and I was frightened. Miss, he might shut down the Gentleman's Gazette. The other ladies are in danger. Lillian Young sighed, her anxiety finally subsiding. She gently patted Hannah Do's shoulder and said confidently, "Don't worry, your mistress isn't a fool. I won't let him ruin my enterprise. Hannah Do, I have an important task for you." "Miss." Hannah Do had a bad feeling, tears welling up as she looked at her. Unfazed, Lillian Young beckoned Hannah Do closer and whispered in her ear. With each word, Hannah Do's face grew paler. By the time Lillian finished, Hannah Do had collapsed to the floor. Ever since her confinement, a new worry plagued her every day, bringing her to the verge of tears. "Your ladyship, it's time for the midday meal." The summer heat was stifling. Roused from a deep sleep, Lillian Young mumbled, "What time is it?" "Your ladyship, it's noon, time for the midday meal. I've prepared everything. Please allow me to assist you with your toilette," the attendant replied softly, expertly helping her dress. "Dinner?" Lillian Young's face paled, sleep instantly forgotten. Energized by a sudden fear, she rolled out of bed and ran to the door. Seeing Sebastian Ward entering the courtyard, she quickly slammed the door shut and bolted it. The attendant, who had been helping her dress, followed close behind, witnessing the Duchess's panicked retreat. She could only shake her head with a wry smile. This wasn't the first time. Ever since His Grace had burned the paintings and confined the Duchess, the two had been at odds. The Duchess loathed His Grace, refusing to share meals or a bed. It seemed the door would need replacing again. Having secured the door, Lillian Young wasn't idle. She promptly settled at the table, picked up her chopsticks and bowl, and scooped some rice, vowing she'd rather starve than dine with her enemy. She'd barely swallowed half her first bite when the bolted door was kicked open, crashing to the floor. Sebastian Ward sauntered in, dusting off his sleeves, glanced at the ravenous diner, and a smug smirk played on his lips as he cocked a brow. Lillian Young resorted to her usual tactics, slamming her bowl and chopsticks down. Her face contorted in displeasure as she scolded, "While imprisoned, one refuses all visitors. Do you not understand decorum? Get out of my sight, off my territory." "Your territory?" Sebastian Ward scoffed. "All of Trent Manor belongs to me, even you. What territory is yours? Who belongs to you?" "Sebastian Ward, I've made myself perfectly clear. Haven't you heard a word I've said these past 3 days? I belong to myself, not to anyone. I have freedom, human rights, and privacy, which you have no right to violate. Are you thick, or is your hearing impaired?" Lillian Young rolled her eyes, drained a large bowl of soup in one gulp, and then, with a satisfied squint, pulled a slender, custom-made silver toothpick from her pocket and began to pick her teeth with an air of nonchalance. Her uncouth behavior was far from ladylike, even the market women possessed thrice her refinement. Sebastian Ward, however, seemed unfazed, calmly seating himself to dine as if he hadn't noticed. After he'd sampled a few dishes, Lillian Young ceased her toothpicking and offered a helpful reminder. "Oh, I forgot to mention, I have a peculiar habit of marking my belongings. Your Grace, with your vast knowledge, must know that animals mark their territory with distinctive signs, like dogs urinating. I'm a bit more refined. To ensure the food is still palatable, I use saliva. I'm quite full now. Your Grace, please, enjoy your meal. Clear the table." Sebastian Ward's chewing slowed, then stopped altogether. His brow furrowed as he set down his chopsticks and abruptly rose, turning to leave without a glance in her direction. Watching his hasty retreat, Lillian Young was in high spirits. She waved a small hand triumphantly and called after him, "Your Grace, you're welcome back anytime. I'll be sure to prepare an even more flavorful spread." Hannah Doe mentioned a rat infestation. "Perhaps I'll add that as an appetizer tomorrow." "Don't thank me, it's simply a wife's loving concern." The servant clearing the dishes trembled, sneaking a glance at the beaming Duchess. Her hand shook, causing a plate to slip and shatter. Terrified, she fell to her knees, pleading, "Forgive me, Your Grace. It was an accident. Forgive me. Get up. Don't rush. I haven't finished eating. You may leave now and return in an hour to clear the table." Lillian Young, unaccustomed to the servility of the Trent Manor staff, raised a brow and dismissed her. "Thank you, Your Grace." The servant, as if granted a reprieve, kowtowed and scurried away, colliding with Hannah Doe at the door. Hannah Doe, observing the servant's panicked state, felt a sense of déjà vu. The Duke had just exited the courtyard in a similar manner. She eyed her mistress with suspicion. "Miss Lillian, what have you done?" Chapter 31, All Things Require Risk. Lillian Young sipped her soup, gesturing to the opposite seat for Hannah Doe to join her. "Sit down." Hannah Doe sat, fidgeting nervously, watching her mistress enjoy her meal. She had a question but, seeing Lillian Young eating fish, waited lest she choke on a bone. "Have you eaten yet?" Lillian Young tore off a chicken leg and offered it to Hannah Doe, then rinsed her hands in the brass basin. "Hannah Doe, is the task I gave you complete?" "Mistress, do you truly intend to take revenge on His Grace?" Hannah Doe, lacking appetite, pushed the chicken leg aside. "Naturally. Think of those illustrations, every one. Painstakingly bartered for by myself and the other ladies. Each draft is priceless, meant to appreciate in value over time. That damned Duke, without a word, burned them all. Watching our fortune vanish into flames is like watching him take our very lives." Lillian Young's fury intensified, her eyes blazing with a desire to personally dismantle Sebastian Ward. Hannah Doe shuddered, pursing her lips. "Mistress's little prank has delayed the Gentleman's Gazette's publication. The printing house took on other work, pushing our date back several days, 10 in total. The other ladies are complaining. If sales are poor, mistress, expect to be torn limb from limb." That is a problem." Lillian Young propped her chin on her hand, her face falling. Preoccupied with revenge against Sebastian Ward, she'd forgotten the publication delay. "Just as I thought, mistress only considers the present, never the consequences." Hannah Doe remained silent, observing her mistress with a mixture of exasperation and sadness. "Hannah Doe, return at once. Tell Helen to inform the printers to release 1,000 copies in the capital to salvage the situation. Then, have them arrange some advertisements. This edition of the Gentleman's Gazette will be a limited release, higher price, fewer copies, but finer quality. Also, notify all branch offices to prepare advertisements, receive stock later, and limit each to 1,000 copies." It was a gamble, and Lillian Young felt uncertain, silently praying to break even. Hannah Doe, sensing the precariousness of the plan, furrowed her brow. "Mistress, how certain are you of this?" Hannah Doe, all endeavors require risk. Regardless of the outcome, one must maintain this attitude. Lillian Young, feeling a pang of guilt, deflected with vague pronouncements, patting Hannah Doe's shoulder with feigned confidence. Hannah Doe gave her a knowing look, picked up the chicken leg, and left without a word. A fortnight later, the Gentleman's Gazette was released in Brighton City. On the Duke's orders, Danny Hayman had queued since dawn, towering over the line of women, enduring the lingering pangs of an insufficient breakfast. He finally secured a copy as the sun climbed high. The moment the magazine was in his hands, Danny Hayman was stunned by the large cover image. His hands trembled, and the magazine thudded to the ground. Recovering, he snatched it up and sprinted back to the Duke's manor, yelling, "Disaster! Something's happened! A terrible thing has happened to His Grace!" Danny Hayman's cries drew a crowd of servants, all concerned for the Duke, trailing him to the library. Sebastian Ward, reviewing a confidential missive, frowned at the commotion. He put the letter aside just as a distraught Danny Hayman burst into the library. Danny Hayman ran into the study, saw his master's indifferent expression, and suddenly felt uneasy. This matter was too shocking, he didn't know if the Duke could bear it. "Did you acquire that thing?" Sebastian Ward coldly looked at Danny Hayman, his gaze drifting towards the study's entrance, where he saw the doorway filled with anxious servants. "Are you all very idle?" Sebastian Ward's smile didn't quite reach his eyes, scaring the servants outside the door into scattering. Danny Hayman, feeling the Duke's anger, his legs turning to ice, trembled and hesitantly offered the magazine, softly suggesting, "Your Grace, please calm down. I'll immediately brew some calming tea." Having said that, Danny Hayman, like a startled rabbit, bolted out the door and vanished. Sebastian Ward was somewhat surprised. Danny Hayman was his personal servant, having seen all sorts of situations, yet he had never seen him flee in such fear. Just how appalling was this thing? He was very curious. Danny Hayman had deliberately placed the magazine face down, showing the back cover. Sebastian Ward picked it up, flipped it over, and saw the image of himself naked. Putting aside personal grievances, the artist had drawn it beautifully, capturing his spirit vividly, even the coldness between his brows was clearly depicted. However, this scoundrel deserved to die. He loathed those who fabricated lies and made up stories. The cover depicted him covered in wounds, above which were the bold words, "Duke Clarence is a pervert, indulging in self-harm." The corner of Sebastian Ward's mouth curled into a cold smile, his icy eyes turning sinister. Suppressing his anger, he flipped through the magazine. When he reached the page about himself, he slowed down, carefully reading each word. With each word he read, his brows furrowed tighter, his anger intensifying. By the end, his eyebrows were a single line, the veins in his hand bulging, and the magazine was instantly crushed to pieces. Suddenly, he thought of something and used his qigong to fly directly to Fleeting Blossom Courtyard where Lillian Young resided. "Ha ha ha, this writing is excellent, truly penned by one Nuang. Her ability to fabricate stories from pictures is truly extraordinary." Sebastian Ward had just arrived outside the courtyard when he heard her carefree laughter. He knew she had read this preposterous work and, enraged, kicked the door open. With a loud crash, the door shattered. Lillian Young, holding a book in both hands, looked in surprise at the man who appeared outside before dinner time. Her cheerful smile froze on her face, looking rather comical. Hannah Doe was also startled. Seeing the pitiful Duke standing at the door, she felt sympathy for him, fearing he would be agitated if he saw the magazine. Quick-wittedly, she snatched the book from her mistress's hands and hid it. With the book snatched from her hands, Lillian Young finally came to her senses. Immediately changing her expression, she enthusiastically ran towards Sebastian Ward, skillfully undressing him with both hands while wailing dramatically, "Outrageous! That one Nuang is outrageous. How could she fabricate such slanderous accusations against your grace? Quickly take off your clothes, let me see if there are any self-inflicted wounds to prove your grace's innocence. Sebastian Ward grasped her small hands, chuckling coldly. In broad daylight, you wish to molest this dupe. This retort successfully silenced Lillian Young. Her hands immediately retracted, wiping them vigorously on her clothes as she stepped back, smiling coquettishly. Your grace is truly jesting. Molesting is surely a man's prerogative. Ha ha ha, after confirming there are no wounds on your chest, I, your consort, have proven your innocence, demonstrating you have no penchant for self-harm. This king is blameless, you needn't fret, my princess. Sebastian Ward's eyes darkened, his entire being radiating a chilling aura as he warned, never look at Gentleman's Gazette again. On what grounds? Give me a reason first. Lillian Young glared, her defiance melting away under his gaze. You are this king's princess. Your eyes should hold only one man, be he flesh and blood or ink on paper. Sebastian Ward extended a hand towards Hannah Doe. Give it here. Hannah Doe, unable to resist, handed over the periodical with trembling hands. The moment the Gentleman's Gazette touched Sebastian Ward's hand, it disintegrated into a flurry of fragments that drifted to the floor. As the last scrap settled, he turned and left, leaving Lillian Young seething but silent. Hashtag Chapter 32, The Missing Marriage Contract. Once he was gone, Hannah Doe breathed a sigh of relief, turning to Lillian Young with a reproachful look. Miss, the king was truly angered. It's fortunate he doesn't know it was your doing, otherwise, you would be in grave danger. Jinxes. Lillian Young rapped Hannah Doe on the head. He deserves it for provoking me. Consider him lucky I didn't make him streak naked like my older brother. Miss, you are wed to the king, and you have consummated the marriage. He is your husband. What wife schemes against her own husband like this? From now on, your nagging reminds me of something crucial. Lillian Young cut Hannah Doe off, her eyes gleaming. Hannah Doe, do me a favor and go to the manor's storehouse. Find the gift that old codger sent and have it brought here. Now? Hannah Doe hesitated. The sooner, the better. Hannah Doe, my entire happiness rests on your shoulders. Lillian Young clasped her hands in earnest entreaty. Hannah Doe could never refuse her when she was like this. With a resigned sigh, she left to carry out her mistress's willful command. Half an hour later, Hannah Doe returned with 2 strapping servants carrying a massive, gleaming golden chest. The chest landed with a thud that spoke of its considerable weight. Lillian Young was momentarily dazzled by the sight of the golden chest. It reeked of her father's nouveau riche extravagance, a blatant display of wealth. The old fox. Inside the chest, a trove of jewels glittered, each piece a treasure, some unique. Lillian barely glanced at them. Her eyes sought a smaller, golden box. She opened it, rare and precious artifacts, but not what she wanted. For nested boxes yielded nothing. The final box, crafted from prized purple sandalwood, the one that should have held the marriage contract, was empty. A flicker of panic touched Lillian Young. Hannah Doe, did you touch anything inside? No, I had it brought here the moment I saw it. What's wrong? Is something missing? Hannah Doe's face creased with worry. It's gone. The marriage contract is gone. Lillian Young clutched the empty sandalwood box, her mind racing with dire possibilities. The marriage contract in the hands of some strange man, her life reduced to domestic drudgery, chained to children and kitchen. Terror mounting, Lillian Young slammed the box shut, ignoring the guards outside, and bolted. She was intercepted the moment she stepped out the door. "Return to your chambers, Your Highness." The guard on the right, face impassive, spoke each word with utmost seriousness. "I don't give a damn about your life or death." Lillian Young, driven mad and her mind in turmoil over the marriage decree, had no patience for trickery. She turned on the guards without hesitation, launching a furious, chaotic attack. The prince had ordered the guards to confine the princess, but hadn't authorized the use of force. After all, she was the mistress of the duke's manor. No one dared lay a hand on her. Still, they had to ensure she didn't leave Fleeting Blossom Courtyard. This was an exceedingly difficult task, resulting in a cycle of being knocked down and getting back up. Survival was the only measure of success. Hannah Doe trailed behind, watching her mistress send guards flying. She dared not intervene, fearing she'd only worsen the chaos and make the situation irredeemable. "Stop!" Slap! A sharp command and a resounding crack brought everyone to a standstill. Sebastian Ward, watching the grimacing guards sprawled on the ground, felt his eye twitch. Before his anger could erupt, Lillian Young, the culprit, reacted first, shouting, "Hannah Doe, smoke bomb!" "Huh?" Hannah Doe, momentarily stunned, quickly grasped her mistress's intent. She pulled 2 smoke bombs from her belt, tossing one at the surrounding guards and hurling the other with all her might at Sebastian Ward. "Your Grace, look out!" "Ugh, what is this?" "It burns." "It stinks." Amidst the chaos, Lillian Young and Hannah Doe easily escaped the Duke's manor. Avoiding the main gate, they scaled the western wall near the street. In their haste, they toppled a palanquin. A figure in green, clutching a snow-white bundle, tumbled out, causing the onlookers to cry out. "Your Excellency!" "Sixth Prince!" Oh dear, they'd caused a right mess. Hannah Doe landed with a thud, a gleaming blade instantly pressed against her neck. The cold steel jolted her awake. Her face crumpled as she wailed, "Mistress, save me!" Lillian Young landed in a willow tree. Turning, she saw her foolish maid captured. Beside Hannah Doe, a man in green slowly rose. His unbound hair, cascading to his waist, was strikingly beautiful. He cradled a jade-white child, turning gently to look at the child with a soft gaze. "William, are you hurt?" The child merely shook his head, his large, dark eyes filled with fear, but remained silent. The 2 figures were of incredibly high status. The man in green was Chris Ward, the imperial uncle, younger brother of the reigning emperor. The child in his arms was the emperor's youngest son, Prince William. Ooh, a new subject. Stunning, yet not seductive. A top-tier pretty boy. Chris Ward's moonlit aura and gentle, handsome face immediately captivated Lillian Young. Her gossipy spirit ignited. Forgetting the marriage decree, she approached the man in green for a closer look, intending to capture his likeness in a sketch. "Your Excellency, beware. Accomplices." Before Lillian Young could get close, a row of gleaming swords appeared before Chris Ward, shielding him and the child. The guards, each radiating murderous intent, waited to strike her down in retribution. Lillian Young, without a moment for explanation, faced a barrage of flashing swords. Dodging desperately, she was quickly reduced to a beggarly state, hair disheveled, clothes torn, and body covered in wounds, a truly pitiful sight. Miss, don't mind me. Flee. Hannah Doe cried, her face ashen at the sight of Lillian's injuries. Flee? She injured William and thinks she can leave unscathed? Capture her, dead or alive. Chris Ward's expression transformed. His handsome, gentle features froze, his narrow eyes blazing with fury. At his command, the guards swarmed Lillian, their attacks turning vicious, intent on ending her life. A pretty face but a hard nut to crack, Lillian thought, unimpressed. She parried the attacks with apparent ease, but soon faltered, sustaining several deep wounds. Realizing her precarious position, she shouted, Hannah Doe, what are you waiting for? Give them a taste of your hospitality. Hannah Doe, snapping out of her stupor, hurled a volley of pepper bombs. Acrid red smoke billowed, filling the air with coughs and cries. Seizing the chaotic moment, Hannah Doe hoisted the badly injured Lillian onto her back and plunged through the red haze, escaping across the rooftops. See to William's care. A man's voice boomed from behind. Both women startled, turning to see Chris Ward burst from the red smoke, a long sword in hand, his exceptional lightness of foot propelling him towards them with terrifying speed. Hannah Doe was no match for him. This time, there's no escape, Lillian sighed, patting Hannah Doe's shoulder, signaling her to put her down. She resolved to face her pursuer. Hannah Doe, terrified for Lillian's safety, trembled as she shielded her, drawing an ornate silver fan in preparation for battle. Miss, she whispered, once I engage him, you must run. Don't worry about me. I leave it to you, Lillian agreed readily, clapping Hannah Doe's shoulder. ### Chapter 33, Tears of Frustration. Hannah Doe, on the verge of tears, said dejectedly, Miss, couldn't you at least hesitate a little? Let me know you care. It would make dying worthwhile. Lillian paused, sighing heavily. I leave it to you, she said, her voice weighted. Still so fake. I can't feel a shred of sincerity, Hannah Doe mumbled, staring glumly at the flagstones. Don't dawdle, he's coming. Lillian barked, rushing forward to meet Chris Ward. A set of silver finger knives, their blades thin as gossamer yet capable of cutting through gold and iron, appeared on her fingertips. Chris Ward, taken aback by her fierce counterattack, was initially driven back. After 3 exchanges, he rallied, channeling his inner strength. His longsword blurred into a whirlwind of real and phantom strikes, swiftly turning the tide against her. Lillian, aware of the vast disparity in their skills, found herself trapped. She fought desperately, sustaining several grievous wounds. As her injuries mounted, her vision blurred, her mind swam, and her limbs began to move instinctively, dodging blows as if controlled by another. Miss. Hannah Doe's face paled as she saw Lillian Young draw the moon sacrifice blade. She rushed forward to intervene, resolutely separating the two combatants and preventing Lillian Young from striking. Miss, don't lose your reason. Withdraw moon sacrifice, quickly. Hannah Doe urged while using her silver fan to fend off Chris Ward. Distracted, she glanced back at Lillian Young to see her eyes transforming. The pupils had lost their color, turning a dull gray, and a streak of blood, like ink dropped into water, spread from a single point, gradually dyeing her eyes crimson. This was a sign of Lillian Young losing control. Hannah Doe was terrified, her soul nearly leaving her body. She felt the surrounding air shift, a familiar dread pressing down on her, making it almost impossible to breathe. Chris Ward also sensed the danger. His phoenix eyes narrowed, and his long sword, evading Hana-do, lunged towards the transforming Lillian Young. No! Hana-do's face was ashen as she watched the long sword thrust towards her mistress, her heart gripped by fear. Lillian Young in her current state couldn't withstand any attack. The consequences would be dire. "Uncle, don't hurt her." Arriving just in time, Sebastian Ward, following Lillian Young's trail, saw the long sword aimed at her. His heart skipped a beat, a sense of ethereal emptiness filling him with a fearful unease. Without hesitation, he grasped the blade with his bare hand. Since when had she begun to affect his emotions so deeply? Sebastian Ward's gaze grew complex as he slowly pushed aside Chris Ward's longsword. Chris Ward looked surprised. His eyes flickered between Sebastian Ward and Lillian Young before he spoke, a hint of understanding in his voice. "So, she is Sebastian's new bride." "Miss, it's all right, it's all right. Calm down, close your eyes, and think of something pleasant." Hana-do, her face pale with fear of Lillian Young's escalating frenzy, grasped her hand tightly and offered careful counsel. He. Suddenly, Lillian Young emitted a series of fragmented, unsettling giggles that carried a chilling, malevolent air. Her hair gradually faded from black to a vibrant, captivating red, and a murderous aura erupted from her entire being. Sebastian Ward's heart lurched. He paid no mind to Chris Ward, turning instead to look at Lillian Young. Her crimson eyes, radiating a dangerous energy, sent a chill through him, a wave of icy coldness that reached his very core. "Charlotte Trent." He tried her name, but there was no response. "Poison. Where's Missing Moon? Where did Missing Moon go?" Hana-do trembled, weeping as she frantically searched through her scattered pouch. Silver coins, hairpins, medicinal pills, and various other items spilled onto the ground. The abundance of medicinal pills caught the attention of both Sebastian Ward and Chris Ward, filling them with a mixture of surprise and suspicion. Their brows furrowed, their gazes towards Hana-do and Lillian Young heavy and complex, a blend of so many emotions that it was impossible to discern their true nature. "Ah, I found it. I found it." Hana-do pulled out a long, ornate needle, her relief evident in her tear-streaked face. With practiced speed, she pinched the needle between two fingers, preparing to pierce Lillian Young's neck. Unexpectedly, Lillian Young reacted with lightning speed. Before Hana-do could act, she struck out with a palm strike, sending her flying. Hana-do sailed through the air for 10 meters before crashing heavily to the ground, scattering paving stones and coughing up a mouthful of blood. She lay there, half-sitting, struggling to breathe. Sebastian Ward was stunned. His expression remained unchanged as he watched Lillian Young. This version of her, radiating such intense murderous energy, was utterly foreign and deeply unsettling to him. "What's going on with her?" Chris Ward was bewildered. "Your Grace, help me." Hana-do was desperate. Suspecting the young mistress's other personality had surfaced, she needed to quickly use the dragon tail needle to render her unconscious and bring her back to the Duke's manor for the elder miss to treat. "He can't help you." Lillian Young laughed wildly, her blood-red eyes glancing at the wounded Hana-do. Covering her mouth, she sneered, "Long time no see, Hana-do. You've grown up." What was happening? Sebastian Ward wondered. Lillian Young's gaze finally landed on him, her eyes holding the imperiousness of a monarch, half disdainful, half mocking, the very picture of an emperor surveying his domain. Sebastian Ward responded with a cold smile. Without needing Hanado's plea, his grip tightened on his longsword, and he lunged towards Lillian Young. His woman, obedience was her only virtue, and she needed to be taught a lesson. Don't hurt the young mistress. Seeing the Duke's ruthless attack, Hanado coughed up blood in alarm, dragging her injured body forward. Chris Ward, observing the maid's desperate attempt, kindly stopped her. Lass, if you're injured, lie still and don't cause more trouble. Sometimes, a bit of roughhousing between husband and wife strengthens their bond. You'll understand when you're married my arse. Get lost, I haven't time for you. Hanado, rarely vulgar, shoved Chris Ward aside, 2 fingers pinching a dragon tail needle as she joined the fray. Young mistress, forgive me. While Sebastian Ward was momentarily stunned from a blow to the chest by Lillian Young, his right arm restrained, Hanado seized the opportunity. With lightning speed, she plunged the dragon tail needle into Lillian's neck. Hanado. Lillian Young, feeling a sharp pain in her neck, her expression turning ferocious, glared resentfully at Hanado before collapsing, unwillingly, into Sebastian Ward's arms. Before Sebastian Ward could react, Hanado snatched Lillian, hoisted her onto her back, and leaped onto a willow tree, vanishing in a few swift movements. Chris Ward, his face etched with astonishment, recovered from the shock of being rebuked. Indignantly, he reprimanded his nephew for his poor management of servants. Sebastian, look at how impudent the maids in your manor are, daring to insult their master. Something's not right. Chris Ward suddenly recalled something, his expression turning grave. That wasn't Charlotte Trent. 3 generations of scholars in the Trent family, both men and women immersed in classic literature, rarely practicing martial arts. That woman's martial skills were exceptional, and her demeanor, unsettling. Sebastian, who was she? Why did she come from the Duke's manor, wearing Charlotte Trent's face? What brings you here, uncle? Sebastian Ward didn't answer, instead leading him into the manor. Elder Miss. Help the young mistress. Hanado raced back to Trent Manor, crying and shouting, attracting a crowd of servants and maids. Jasper Young and his wife, returning to the manor, heard the commotion from afar. Rushing towards the scene, they found his sister covered in wounds. Rage surged within him as he clenched his fists, demanding, who did this? Who hurt Lillian? Husband, this isn't the time. Quickly send someone to fetch my younger sister so she can treat Lillian. Charlotte Trent, comforting her husband, helped Hanado carry Lillian to a room. Looking at the injured, red-haired Lillian Young, she felt both worried and guilty, repeatedly wiping away tears. ### Chapter 34, Jasper's Predicament. Jasper Young, observing his mother's furtive weeping and comprehending her thoughts, then glanced at his younger sister, his heart heavy, brows deeply furrowed. Perhaps, from the outset, he shouldn't have acquiesced to his father's scheme, allowing his third sister to be offered as a bride to Duke Clarence. What happened? Why is the third young mistress injured? Brian Young entered, his face etched with worry, his old features rending with anger as he glared at Hanado. Tell me, who hurt the third young mistress? It's all father's fault. I initially disagreed with Jasper being married off to Duke Clarence. Now Jasper's hair has turned red, Duke Clarence must have done something to her. Jasper Young's voice was thick with anger, his words sharp and unyielding. Brian Young's aged face crumpled, his frustration erupting in a roar. How is it solely my fault? I did consult you all, and at that time, didn't you, Didn't you also agree? Second daughter, fourth daughter, everyone agreed. What's all this commotion? Silence. Catherine Young, having rushed back to the manor, witnessed the father and son's quarrel. Fury surged within her. She shot a fierce glare at the two before addressing Hannah Doe and Charlotte Trent. Sister-in-law, help Hannah. Doe, take Jasper to my alchemy room. Second sister, is there a connection between third sister's hair and her injury? Charlotte Trent, startled by Lillian Young's crimson hair, was deeply concerned. This was another secret of the Young family, one that concerned Lillian Young. Catherine Young, unwilling to elaborate, turned coldly and departed to prepare the necessary medicinal ingredients. Charlotte Trent, sensing a dismissal, felt a chill of unease but refrained from further inquiries, assisting Hannah Doe in escorting Lillian to the alchemy room. Lillian Young was brought into the alchemy room. Catherine Young dismissed everyone, even Hannah Doe's personal maid. The door closed, leaving behind a palpable air of anxiety. Master, young Master Southwood has come to propose marriage again. Just as the door closed, a commotion erupted in the courtyard. Old Truman, the gatekeeper, shuffled his aging frame towards them. Again. Brian Young, his patience wearing thin, waved his sleeve dismissively. Send him away. With the second daughter in this state, who has the mind to deal with him? But Old Truman hesitated, his face creased with concern. Young Master Southwood seems to know that the second young mistress has returned. He says he won't leave until he sees her. He won't leave. Brian Young's voice rose in exasperation. Close the gates, release the dogs, and have him beaten off the property. Yes, Master. Old Truman, disapproving of his master's harsh methods but powerless to intervene, could only furrow his brows and shake his head as he departed. Wait. After Old Truman had taken a few steps, Jasper Young called out, pausing in thought. Tell Neil Southwood that the young mistress is out on business and that he should return another day. What are you doing? Brian Young's eyes, bloodshot with rage, fixed on his defiant son. You've been quite rebellious lately, boy. I believe your hide needs a tanning. What's all this noise? Anyone who continues this racket will never speak again. The door abruptly swung open, revealing Catherine Young, her face a mask of displeasure. She glared at the two boisterous men, then slammed the door shut after they exchanged a tense stare. Her threat hung in the air, silencing everyone. An eerie quiet descended upon the area outside the door. Catherine Young, releasing a pent-up breath, produced a crimson pill and administered it to Lillian Young. Swiftly, Lillian Young stirred, her eyes fluttering open, a sinister smile playing on her lips. Venomous touch, it's been a while. Your poison is as potent as ever. Cease your prattle. Catherine Young fixed her with a stern gaze, the iciness in her eyes deepening. Why have you awakened, Lillian? Call me Lillian. The Youngs never acknowledged me, Lillian is my rightful name. Her other persona now awake, Lillian Young furrowed her brow in displeasure, languidly rising from the bed and slipping on her embroidered shoes, preparing to depart. As she reached the door, a poisoned needle whizzed past, narrowly missing her. Catherine Young, wielding another poisoned needle in her hand, warned, before you answer my question, you will not leave this room. I have a 10-year agreement. Once fulfilled, I shall return your precious, dutiful Lillian Young. Lillian offered a sly, bewitching smile, then flung open the door and darted out like an arrow loosed from its bow, a gust of wind in her wake, vanishing in the blink of an eye. Miss Hannah Doe, most familiar with her ways, was the first to react, giving chase a moment later, as the others finally regained their composure. Jasper Young stormed into the alchemy laboratory, demanding in frustration, "Second sister, how could you let her go? She will return, there's no need for concern." Catherine Young gazed towards where Lillian had disappeared, her expression growing complex. She couldn't help but add, "Perhaps she's right. We never truly treated her as family," clearly another Jasper. "That's why there's such disappointment and heartache in her eyes." The others remained silent, her words striking a nerve. Their faces grim, they dispersed one by one. In the stillness of the night, a single lamp flickered within the Duke's manor. Sebastian Ward lowered the book in his hand and opened the rosewood box on the table. He withdrew a red-covered marriage certificate and slowly unfolded it, his gaze falling upon the blank space where the groom's name should be. Beside it, in delicate script, was her name, Lillian Young, sealed with a bright red imprint. Uncertainty gnawed at him, casting doubt upon her purpose in infiltrating the Duke's manor disguised as a stand-in. Should I trust her? Despite his lingering suspicions, his hand moved of its own accord, dipping the pen in ink and filling the empty space with his name. Their names now side by side, Sebastian Ward stared at them, a slow smile eventually gracing his lips. His finger traced her name as. He softly sighed, "Perhaps fate has decreed that we belong together. Lillian Young, wherever you may go, I shall be your final and only haven." A month later, in the Skylar Kingdom, within the band Summer Inn, in the finest room, Lillian Young awoke to the brilliant morning light, as if emerging from a long, drawn-out dream. She felt utterly exhausted, devoid of all strength. A coolness against her chest, something placed there causing discomfort, made Lillian Young frown. Reaching up, her hand brushed against a cold silk cord. With surprise, she pulled it out, revealing a blood-red lucite pendant hanging from the red silk. The pendant was peach-shaped, with a hollow center containing a single drop of red liquid that gently swayed with her movements. What devilry is this? She never wore jewelry. How did this come to be? Lillian Young, as if struck by lightning, sat up abruptly in bed, scrutinizing the lucite pendant, trying to discern its origin. Wait, that wasn't the point. The point was, where was she? Lillian Young quickly surveyed her surroundings, certain this wasn't a place she knew. A chill crept into her heart. Surely not. Had that handsome man from that day captured her and imprisoned her? Ah, this red gown. Lillian Young, seeing herself in a crimson dress similar to a bridal gown, panicked. Barefoot, she bolted from the bed towards the door. Just as she reached for the handle, it was pushed open, sending her tumbling to the floor. "Apologies, miss. I didn't know you were behind the door." A man dressed as an innkeeper stood outside, holding a basin of hot water, stammering his apologies. Lillian Young's eyes lit up. Like a carp leaping from water, she sprang to her feet, grabbed the innkeeper's shoulders, and demanded, "Where am I? Who are you?" Chapter 35, "You're hiding something from me." The innkeeper, giving her a strange look, stammered, "Miss, this is, the band Summer Inn in the Skylar Kingdom. I'm a waiter here." Skylar Kingdom? Lillian Young couldn't believe her ears. Her voice rose to a shriek, her eyes wide with disbelief, her expression terrifying. The innkeeper trembled before her, stammering, It is the Skylar Kingdom. Why, miss?" Before he could finish, Lillian Young had completely fallen apart. Clawing at her hair, she muttered, "How is this possible? I just went to sleep. How did I end up in the Skylar Kingdom, thousands of miles away? Ah, my head is spinning. What's going on? This whole alien abduction thing is ridiculous. Miss? A sudden, questioning voice made her weep with relief. Looking up, she saw the familiar face of Hannah. Tears welled in both their eyes as they embraced. Hannah, it's so good to see you. It means we're still in the same dimension. You scared me to death. Lillian Young patted Hannah's back excitedly, using the other girl's pain to confirm that this wasn't a dream. Hannah winced, ignoring the pain in her back. Miss, where have you been for the past month? I've been chasing after you all the way here. I was so scared. If anything happened to you, how could I face the master, the young master, and the sisters at Snow Aroma Pavilion? Oh, miss, why are your lips so swollen? Ah? Lillian Young covered her mouth. Her fingers brushed against her lips, feeling the burning sensation. Her face paled, then flushed crimson. Fury blazed in her eyes as she roared, "Who dared steal my first kiss? Didn't you give your first kiss to the prince? How else would the poison have been cured that day?" Hannah was utterly bewildered. Cough, cough. Hannah, some things are best left unsaid. Lillian Young choked on her words, mortified enough to want to bury Hannah alive. Miss, you've been away for a long time. The prince must be worried. We should return to the capital as soon as possible. Hannah, how did I get to the Skylar Kingdom? All she remembered was being beaten senseless, chased by a handsome man, and then nothing. The unease of missing memories made Lillian Young very anxious. Hannah glanced at her, unsure how to lie. Everyone at Young Estate knew about the Mrs. Possession, but they didn't want her to know. You're hiding something from me. Seeing Hannah's evasive glance, Lillian Young, knowing her maid well, instantly realized something was amiss. No, absolutely not. Hannah, her thoughts seen through, startled, hastily shook her head and waved her hands to prove her innocence, afraid of revealing any flaws. Her eyes dared not meet Lillian's as she lowered her head and blurted out, "Miss, do you remember the gentleman we met when we left the Duke's manor?" "I do." "Not bad looking, just a terrible personality." Lillian Young recalled the day she was beaten so miserably, her brows furrowing unconsciously. That gentleman was exceptionally handsome, and Miss wanted to include him in the next installment of Chronicles of Majestic Landscapes, so she followed him to the Skylar Kingdom. This lie was so difficult to tell, even she didn't believe it. Hannah shamefully lowered her head, licking her lips as she racked her brains for what to say next, how to avoid arousing her mistress's suspicion. Lillian Young listened silently to Hannah's story, saying nothing, waiting for her to finish. After a long silence, Hannah finally thought of a way. Clenching her fists to encourage herself, she continued, "Then, miss, your whereabouts were exposed, and you were ambushed from behind by the gentleman's servants. They knocked you unconscious with a wooden club as thick as a bull's rim. Then, they stuffed you into a sack, threw you onto a carriage, and took you straight to the Skylar Kingdom. To save you, I endured the grief and gritted my teeth, following them and waiting for an opportunity. Finally, I rescued you, right here, right now." A wooden club as thick as a bull's rim? How painful that must have been. Lillian Young fearfully touched the back of her head, feeling a lump beneath her fingers, still vaguely sore, despite knowing Hannah was lying. Seeing Lillian react to her words, Hana-do pressed her advantage, wanting to solidify her belief and dispel any doubts. That gentleman is out on business and will return to the inn in half an hour. Let's leave while they're not here. Late last night, I overheard the gentleman talking to his servants. He said he was going to the graveyard 10 miles outside the city today to dig a pit to bury you alive. He must be leading people to dig the pit now, just waiting for nightfall to bury you, Mississippi. To urge her to leave quickly, Hana-do began to threaten her, mysteriously whispering in her ear. Doing this for the first time, her skills were still unrefined. Instead of scaring Lillian, she frightened herself into a cold sweat. Lillian, young, wise and perceptive, knew Hana-do was hiding something. Whatever it was enough to keep Hana-do tight-lipped, and no matter what she tried, she couldn't get the truth out of her. She could only temporarily let it go and observe, giving Hana-do some leeway for her first attempt at a frightening lie. Thus, a half-suspicious, half-frightened, very unnatural and strange expression appeared on Lillian Young's face, looking somewhat terrifying. Even her voice became gloomy. Then what are we waiting for? Let's pack our things and leave quickly. Did it work? Why did she feel so uneasy, as if she were being toyed with by her mistress? Hana-do watched Lillian leave like the wind, tilting her head in confusion. What are you still standing there for, waiting to be buried alive, you silly girl? Seeing Hana hadn't caught up, Lillian Young turned back to urge her on. Ah, coming. Hana-do, no longer confused, quickly chased after her. The two raced all the way back to Brighton City, returning to Young Estate half a month later. It was the height of summer, the sun blazing. Mistress and maid, having traveled for half a day, were hungry and exhausted, sweating profusely as they rode straight into the estate. As the two entered the gate, they were struck by a blaze of red. Under the harsh sunlight, a tall man stood in the courtyard, his back looking somewhat familiar. Hearing the sound of hooves, the man quickly turned around, his familiar face instantly brightening Lillian Young's expression. Why was this fellow here? All this red must be for a proposal, right? I've finally found you. Neil Southwood, overjoyed to see her, beamed and walked towards her, extending a hand as if to help her dismount. Feigning innocence, Lillian Young tugged at the reins, urging her horse forward to avoid Neil Southwood. Turning back to Hana-do, she said, Hana-do, Master Southwood has come personally to propose. Given his status and character, it's a good match. If you marry him, I'll have peace of mind. I just heard him call you, so intimate. He's certainly closing the distance between you two. Pick a good day and get married. Huh? Hana-do's eyes widened, staring blankly at Neil Southwood. A moment later, goosebumps erupted all over her skin. Shaking her head, she refused. I, Hana-do, vow to serve my lady for life. I've never considered marriage. Man, Lillian, it's you I want to marry, not Hana-do. Neil Southwood knew she was playing dumb, embarrassed by her deliberate words. Fortunately, as a merchant, thick skin was a common advantage, easily deployed. Thinking of his incompetent nephew, what problem couldn't be solved? Lillian Young shuddered at the intimate address. She'd met plenty of brazen individuals, but none so thick-skinned. She'd implicitly refused his proposal, even kindly offered him a way out, yet he persisted. Hashtag chapter 36, does it matter whom I marry? You again? An angry voice boomed from afar, causing Neil Southwood's face to drain of color. He trembled, then quickly adopted a fawning, friendly Expression. Young uncle, your nephew greets you. Go on, go on. Don't bother my girl. She's already married. Brian Young said, rudely shoving Neil southward. Forgive my impertinence, but dare I ask whom Lillian married? His name, his family, where does he live? Neil Southwood interrupted Brian Young, asking with a polite smile. The second daughter was a substitute bride, and the man she married was royalty. If discovered, it would be treason. Naturally, the details of her husband's family couldn't be revealed. Brian Young, flustered by the question, scratched his head, unable to answer. Does it matter whom I marry? To rescue her father's few remaining hairs, Lillian Young reluctantly spoke up, further annoyed by Neil Southwood's intrusive questions. Neil Southwood, adept at reading faces in the marketplace, instantly detected her displeasure. Observing her expression, he knew she was angry. Lillian, don't misunderstand. Neil Southwood felt a twinge of shame and frustration. Countless women in the capital adored him, he'd never been so disliked. Lillian has just returned from a long journey and must be tired. I'll come to formally propose tomorrow. Young uncle, I take my leave. Staying longer would only deepen her aversion. Wisely, Neil Southwood retreated, planning his return for the next day. Impossible. You still want to come back? Lillian Young's eye twitched violently as he politely withdrew. His parting words ruined her mood, draining her energy. Rolling her eyes, she snapped, Don't come tomorrow. Take your betrothal gifts with you. A woman with a child doesn't take two husbands. If you're happy, I'll let you go. Most men are fickle. If you're ever neglected, my arms are always open for you to lean on. With these dashing words, a smug Neil Southwood departed. Under the blazing sun, faced with the handsome, wealthy man's direct confession, she felt no flutter of affection, only a surge of rage. Bloody hell, someone give me a knife. I'll stab that bastard. How dare he curse my marriage to fail? After confirming her suspicions, she realized her wretched father had slipped the marriage certificate into the betrothal gifts, which were now in Sebastian Ward's possession. That scoundrel! He's a good actor, watching me make a fool of myself without changing his expression. Knowing the marriage certificate was gone, Lillian Young, fuming, returned to her room to vent her frustration by sticking pins in a doll. She'd just affixed Sebastian Ward's miniature face onto the figure when a sweat-drenched Hannah Doe burst in, gulping down the cold tea on the table. Seeing her drenched in sweat, Lillian Young asked curiously, Where have you been running around like a madwoman? It's bad. Neil Southwood is here again. Hannah Doe gasped, her face pale. Hearing his name, Lillian Young's face darkened. Ignore him. That old fox will deal with it. But this isn't a solution. Neil Southwood comes to propose every day. Miss will surely grow tired of it. How about, Hannah Doe trailed off, looking at her with a sly grin. Returning to the Duke's manor. Lillian Young replied with a smile, then continued, readily agreeing, All right, on the condition that we find a way to make His Grace invite me back. If we return on our own, not only will it be embarrassing, but he'll also laugh at us. Hannah Doe pouted, perplexed. Scheming wasn't her forte. Miss was clearly making things difficult. She had no intention of returning to the Duke's manor. How cunning. Fine. With your intelligence, I fear I'll never return to the Duke's manor. I have a task for you, follow His Grace and see where he goes. Lillian Young, disguised as Charlotte Trent with a simple hairstyle and changed clothes, headed out. Hannah Do, puzzled, trailed behind her. Why follow his grace? Where are you going, miss? To hunt for handsome men, of course. Lillian Young replied with a mischievous grin. The triennial imperial examinations brought talented men from all over to the capital, offering a chance to discover new beauties for the Gentleman's Gazette. She wouldn't miss this opportunity. Today was the day the results were posted. The top 3, regardless of their looks, possessed talent. A hero deserved a beauty, a scholar a fair maiden. How could her triennial Gentleman's Gazette special be without them? In the Scholars' Pavilion, Lillian Young ordered a pot of clear wine and some snacks. Sitting barefoot on the windowsill, she poured herself a drink, her eyes gleaming as she stared at the crossroads, awaiting the top scholars' parade. He's arrived, he's arrived. The top scholar is heading towards Scholars' Pavilion. Scholars' Pavilion again. This year's scholars are also from Scholars' Pavilion. Scholars' Pavilion's reputation is soaring again. Business is about to boom, sigh. A waiter dashed from the crossroads into Scholars' Pavilion, his face beaming, causing a stir of excited chatter amongst the patrons. The wine in. Lillian Young's hand trembled slightly, spilling a few drops. Her beautiful eyes narrowed as she gazed into the distance. In less than half an hour, the resounding clang of gongs and drums echoed from afar. The main street outside Scholars' Pavilion was packed with people craning their necks, eager to catch a glimpse of the top scholar's countenance. The owner of Scholars' Pavilion instructed the waiters to prepare strings of firecrackers, ordering them to be lit as soon as the procession appeared at the crossroads. Boom! The deafening firecrackers exploded, filling the air with smoke. Lillian Young, perched on the windowsill, choked on the fumes, coughing for a long while before finally stopping. She awkwardly took a sip of wine and, looking up, saw the long procession at the crossroads. The top scholar, riding tall on horseback and clad in a triumphant red robe, waved to the crowd. His peach blossom eyes darted flirtatiously towards the pretty maidens and young brides, eliciting continuous screams and feints. Chaos erupted on the street. This top scholar is quite the flamboyant rake. Lillian Young spat out a mouthful of wine, staring at the top scholar in astonishment, her mouth agape and eyes wide. How can this be? The top scholar is him? A notorious flower thief, brazenly taking the imperial examination and placing in the top 3? Transforming from black to white, now using his official authority to steal flowers and herbs everywhere. Your Majesty, are you unwell? Waiter, I want a whole watermelon, the bigger the better. Lillian Young jumped barefoot from the windowsill, pushed open the door of her private room, and shouted to the waiter downstairs, and a basket of chicken eggs. Bring me all the chicken eggs in your kitchen. I want them all. Huh? The waiter downstairs looked at her quizzically, clearly confused. Lillian Young tossed 10 taels of silver to the waiter. This is your tip. Now hurry up and fetch what I need. The faster, the better. Yes, Mississippi. Just a moment. Rewarded with the generous tip, the waiter, though still puzzled, cheerfully went to fulfill her request. In less than the time it takes to drink a small cup of tea, the waiter brought the requested items to her private room. With practiced deftness, he placed 6 watermelons and a basket of chicken eggs on the table, inquiring obsequiously, everything you requested is here, Mississippi. Do you have any further instructions? Just say the word, and I'll attend to it with utmost haste. Satisfied with the 6 watermelons, Lillian Young nodded at the waiter. She then selected the largest one and went to the window. Holding the watermelon in one hand and aiming with the other, she squinted at the top scholar's detestable face, preparing to throw. Chapter 37, a scene of utter chaos. Do you wish to have the watermelon cut, miss? The ever-attentive waiter stepped forward with a cleaver, offering, allow me to take care of that small task for you. Lillian Young glanced at the waiter, her gaze drawn to the cleaver in his hand. She was sorely tempted to snatch it and hurl it at her target. However, on second thought, Andy Bloom hadn't truly wronged her. At most, she found his philandering ways distasteful and felt a righteous urge to teach him a lesson. A bit of discipline was fine, but taking a life seemed excessive. All right, put the knife down. Truly fearing she wouldn't be able to resist splitting the watermelon, Lillian Young sighed regretfully, telling the waiter to withdraw, quashing her impulsive notion. Yes, then I'll be going. The waiter smiled, retreating from the private room, and the instant the door closed, he froze in astonishment. He saw Lillian Young brace the large watermelon with one hand, twist her waist, and with a graceful lean, hurl the melon out the window, targeting Andy Bloom on horseback. After the watermelon launched, she calmly yelled down, Andy Bloom, I love you. Having shouted, her figure flickered, dodging to the side. Her fingers hooked swiftly, snapping the window shut to conceal herself. Then, as cries erupted from below, Lillian Young pushed the window open again, peeking out before pelting the crowd with eggs one by one. The waiter stood dumbfounded. By the time he recovered, all 6 watermelons were gone, and the egg basket was half empty, dozens of eggs flung into the street below. The waiter, his face a mask of distress, watched in disbelief as she continued to hurl eggs, his curiosity compelling him closer to the window. What's happening? The waiter gaped. This was the most disastrous scholars' parade he'd ever witnessed. Miss, what grudge do you bear against the scholar, to unleash such viciousness upon his triumph? Chaos reigned below. Fruits and vegetables flew through the air, interspersed with the occasional egg, all aimed at Andy Bloom. Despite his considerable martial arts skills, he couldn't defend against the barrage. Less than half an hour later, Andy Bloom was a pathetic sight, covered in leaves and egg yolk, his red robes transformed into a green and red mess. Thankfully, his face was shielded, otherwise, he'd be a swollen pig's head, his reputation ruined. With each egg that flew, the waiter glanced at Lillian Young. His repeated looks became a silent reproach. Slightly embarrassed, Lillian Young explained as she threw, have you heard of filling a carriage with fruit? It's how a woman expresses her affection. Don't mind me. Expresses affection? The waiter's mouth twitched. Miss, don't take me for an illiterate fool. Filling a carriage with fruit isn't done like this. At least they use fruit, not vegetables, and you've switched to eggs. This is clearly a personal vendetta. Who are you trying to confess to? A furious question suddenly erupted from the window. Both turned their heads. Lillian Young, startled, instinctively took 3 steps back. Sebastian Ward, his face a terrifying mask, had somehow appeared at the window, the egg she'd just thrown still in his hand. He landed gracefully beside her. Seeing her bare white feet, anger flared in his eyes. Put your shoes on. Why are you here? Lillian Young, no longer daring to throw the egg in her hand, slipped on her embroidered shoes and sat at the table. Filling a carriage with fruit? Sebastian Ward gritted out each word, a clear sign of his fury. He'd spotted her since the watermelon incident. The "I love you" had been particularly jarring. Had he not seen her subsequent egg-throwing, he would have lost all reason and dragged her back to the manor. "I'm just jesting, do not take it seriously." Lillian Young, noticing his anger and forcing a strained smile, quickly changed the subject. "When did your grace arrive?" Sebastian Ward flung the egg in his hand, imbuing it with 7/10 of his internal force, enough to cause injury, aiming it directly at the wretched Andy Bloom. Somewhat startled by his action, Lillian Young moved to the window to observe, silently hoping the egg would find its mark. She was disappointed. Andy Bloom narrowly avoided it. Sensing something amiss, Andy Bloom grew wary, his eyes darting around. Fearing discovery, Lillian Young quickly ducked out of sight. Whoosh, whoosh, whoosh. More eggs flew through the air. Lillian Young stared, dumbfounded, as Sebastian Ward, his expression unchanged, continued to pelt the newly appointed scholar, chosen by his own father, the king. He hated Andy Bloom. Impossible. As she stood there bewildered, an egg was presented to her. Lillian Young looked incredulously at Sebastian Ward, and under his cold gaze, tremblingly accepted it. "Once you've thrown it, come back to the Duke's manor with me." "Yes, your grace." And so, the waiter, on the verge of tears, could only watch as the couple pelted the newly appointed scholar with eggs, their audacity boundless. "Maid!" A sudden horse's whinny from outside startled Lillian Young, causing her to drop the last egg. It landed not out the window, but at Sebastian Ward's left foot, shattering. Lillian Young's eye twitched. "My apologies, Your Grace," she said, forcing a smile. "My hand slipped." "You! Return Jasper to me." A furious shout came from the street before Sebastian Ward could speak. Andy Bloom, having identified his assailant, turned an ugly shade of green. The horse, struck by Sebastian Ward, bolted towards the scholars' pavilion, scattering the crowd, who scrambled to avoid being trampled. Suddenly, a raggedly dressed child was shoved into the path of the runaway horse. "Look out!" Lillian Young cried, diving from the window like a swallow from its nest. She scooped up the child and rolled across the ground, narrowly avoiding the horse's hooves. "Lillian!" Sebastian Ward, his face pale, followed her out the window a moment later. He dispatched the crazed horse with a single blow, then turned a cold gaze on the furious Andy Bloom before silently helping Lillian to her feet. "Are you all right?" Lillian Young, her face pale, offered a weak smile to the child she still held protectively. The child, stunned into silence, finally burst into tears. "Wah, that was scary." "Don't cry, it's all right now, it's all right." Lillian Young slowly got up, sat on the ground, and gently comforted the child. After a while, the child calmed down. Lillian Young, breathing a sigh of relief, looked down and noticed her bloodstone amulet, tied with a red string, lying on the ground. She instinctively touched her neck, realized it was gone, and quickly picked it up, tucking it into her sleeve. Sebastian Ward saw her conceal the bloodstone, and his gaze turned icy, a chilling frost descending upon his features. A month ago, she vanished from the Duke's manor without a trace. Around the same time, the Sterling family, prominent for 3 generations, was massacred, and their heirloom, the Heartlock bloodstone, was stolen. Why does she possess the stolen bloodstone? Was she involved in the Sterling's demise? The timing is certainly suspicious. Right then, tell me, whose child are you? Lillian Young, her right shoulder dislocated, struggled to rise from the ground, helping the child up as well. She was stunned to see a bloodstone identical to her own hanging around the child's neck. Hers had fallen out during the tumble. Is this a coincidence, or? Lillian Young's eyes darkened as she touched the bloodstone in her sleeve. A sense of foreboding washed over her. This suddenly appearing bloodstone felt ominous, a harbinger of trouble. Perhaps she should discard it. Chapter 38. Her wicked delights. The child, clearly worried about the bloodstone, quickly tucked it back inside their clothing, looking at her anxiously. Let me see your hand. Sebastian Ward, his face impassive, took her right hand to examine the injury. Ow, that hurts. Lillian Young winced, her teeth gritted in pain. Couldn't you be a bit gentler? Ever heard of tenderness? She complained. Ignoring her, Sebastian Ward supported her right arm with one hand and firmly pressed down on the dislocated joint with the other. A sharp click echoed as Lillian Young jumped, crying out in indignation, "You did that on purpose! Are you trying to cripple me? That hurt! I've never met a man so rough with a lady. I regret marrying you." Sebastian Ward's icy glare silenced her. She pouted, her lips trembling with suppressed frustration. You again? Andy Bloom leaped off his horse and stormed towards them. Seeing Lillian Young, his expression changed as quickly as a turning page, anger morphing into an exaggerated display of affection. My darling. A day without you is like 3 autumns. I've been lovesick since our parting, yearning for this moment. I went to Trent Manor, but you were nowhere to be found. Where have you been all this time? Are you well? Have you missed me? With every word Andy Bloom uttered, Sebastian Ward's face grew colder, the air around him crackling with barely contained fury. Standing beside him, Lillian Young, sensing the escalating tension, felt a thrill of malicious amusement. She was sorely tempted to goad them into a brawl. Someone, take this scoundrel who dares to harass the Duchess to the dungeons. At Sebastian Ward's command, several figures materialized from the shadows. In a blink, Andy Bloom was bound and dragged away. Andy Bloom, stunned by Sebastian Ward's words, only realized he was being arrested when it was too late. His face turned ashen as he looked reproachfully at Lillian Young. Darling, tell me it's all a lie. You're not a duchess, are you? And this ruffian, surely he can't be the Duke? Well, he is the Duke of Clarence. And a right ruffian, too, Lillian Young added silently. Delighted by Andy Bloom's predicament, she smiled slyly, feigning innocence as she twisted the knife. And you seem to have mistaken me for someone else. I'm not your darling, and I've never met you before. I am Mrs. Clarence, Charlotte Trent. Good day. Andy Bloom stared at her in disbelief, speechless, allowing the guards to lead him away. Her morbid amusement, toying with others. Sebastian Ward couldn't help the twitch in his eye, masking all emotion as he said, Bring the child back to the Duke's manor. Bring the child along? Lillian Young looked at him in surprise, receiving a confirming glance. She said cheerfully, unexpectedly, Your Grace is a kind soul. I admire that. Come, little one. The child shyly glanced at her, then turned and ran towards Sebastian Ward, clinging tightly to his leg without letting go, saying nothing, just staring up at him. Sigh, little tyke, don't set yourself up for disappointment. Lillian Young was quite disgruntled. He clearly wasn't fond of children, so what was with the child's look? Choosing the iceberg over her, wasn't that just asking for trouble? Sebastian Ward looked at the child, his brow furrowed, finally yielding to its persistence. He bent down, scooped the child into his arms, and said softly, "I know you're frightened. From now on, you can live peacefully at the Duke's manor. Will they come back again?" The child, terrified, burrowed deeper into Sebastian Ward's embrace. "No one can guarantee that. You must learn to be strong, learn to protect yourself." Sebastian Ward spoke sternly, like a schoolmaster giving a lesson. The child trembled, a flicker of disappointment crossing their face. As the last glimmer of hope faded, only determination remained in their eyes. "I must live, then find him and avenge my parents and grandfather." Revenge? That's not a pleasant word. Lillian Young felt uneasy hearing the child speak of vengeance. A child of 8 or 9, growing up with such thoughts, their future held either forgetting or killing. "Little one, you're so young. Your long life has just begun. Don't let hatred blind you, living in a hell of revenge. Happiness and vengeance never intersect. The closer you get to vengeance, the quicker you'll lose happiness." Such words coming from her mouth. Sebastian Ward watched her gently admonishing the child, his feelings a complex mix. "Why are you looking at me like that?" Lillian Young felt uncomfortable under his sharp gaze. His response was a cold, rigid back. Lillian Young followed behind, rolling her eyes and muttering, "Madman, forgot his meds today, eh? So strange." Back at the Duke's manor, Lillian Young was intrigued by the rescued child and the blood-red lucite pendant they wore. Lucite was often priceless, beyond the reach of ordinary people, let alone blood-red lucite of such exquisite color. The child, dressed in rags like a beggar, shouldn't have possessed such a thing. This child definitely had a story. Touching the blood-red lucite pendant she'd placed back around the child's neck, she decided to probe. So pitiful, so young to have lost loving parents. "I heard the Sterlings were massacred, not even the chickens and ducks were spared. It's fortunate this one escaped. I've heard talk of this." Heavens, the Sterlings, 3 generations of officials, deeply trusted and favored by His Majesty. With this incident, His Majesty has ordered His Grace to investigate and punish the perpetrators. The Sterlings were all of martial background, a true martial arts family. To be wiped out like this, the culprit must be formidable, possessing exceptional martial skill. I pray His Grace encounters no danger in this investigation. "Ah! Your Highness." 2 maidservants, gossiping in hushed tones, startled at the sight of Lillian Young, knelt, and bowed. "Your servant greets your Highness." "Rise." Lillian Young, having overheard their conversation, inquired with a serious expression, "Do you know that child?" The 2 maidservants exchanged uneasy glances, remaining silent. "Do not be afraid, I mean no harm. I simply wish to know his name." Lillian Young softened her voice and offered a reassuring smile. Seeing her smile, the maidservants visibly relaxed. After a moment's hesitation, they replied, "Your Highness, the child brought back by His Grace is the young master of the Sterling family, Mortimer Sterling. He is 8 years old." "Yes, I understand. You may go and prepare some refreshments. I shall speak with the boy for a while." A heavy weight settled upon Lillian Young's heart. The blood ruby around her neck suddenly felt like 1,000 pounds, threatening to break her neck. Lillian Young didn't know how she arrived at Mortimer Sterling's door. Hesitating whether to knock, she heard voices within. It seemed Sebastian Ward was questioning the child, and she could faintly hear sobbing. "You say you saw them? Do you recall their appearance?" Sebastian Ward's voice held a note of uncertainty.